Hey everybody, Jason Widdop here, back with episode 4 of By Marketers for Marketers. Today I am here with Lauren Goldstein. Lauren and I go way, way back. I love it. She's currently the CRO of Annuitas, which is a strategic demand marketing consultancy. I've had a chance to work with her there a little bit as well, but Lauren, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Annuitas and women in revenue a little bit too.
Awesome. Nice to see everybody. So Annuitas, as Jason said, we're really in the business of helping organizations with their growth strategy. I no longer say it's a marketing firm or a sales firm, because when you look at growth strategy, it's really about team sport. So it's really about aligning the people, the process, the content, and technology within organizations to create a killer demand engine. So the great part about being the Chief Revenue Officer at Annuitas is I actually get to drink my own champagne. So not only do we do killer work for companies in financial services, tech, healthcare, and a lot of other industries in B2B, but I actually get to be a practitioner every single day. So it's been a great adventure. But as we talk about great adventures, in the last 18 months, there's about a dozen women and I who co-founded an organization called Women in Revenue. And it's really an opportunity for us to give back to women that are in sales and marketing and customer success. So if you want to know a little bit more, go to womeninrevenue.org.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm excited to have you on today because, like I said early on, we go back quite a bit. So we both worked at an agency called Babcock & Jenkins in Portland. And it's really where I cut my teeth on B2B marketing. It was the first time I'd ever even heard of Serious Decisions. I remember like week 1, I was flying down to San Diego. We were going to the conference. I was like, what is this B2B marketing stuff? And Lauren had already been doing it for probably like 15 years by the time I even kind of like started to figure out what it was. And we got to work there, and Lauren worked there for 18 years and really pretty much ran the agency. And so I'll just say that, and brought in all the best deals, and it was just the customers loved her and just knows a lot about B2B marketing. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today, which I'm excited about, we're going to talk about, it's going to have an ABM flavor because it usually does, but we're actually going to talk a little bit about the history of ABM. Like, where did it start? Because Lauren and I share a belief, I guess it's a belief, that ABM is not a new thing. We've been doing ABM, well, as we'll talk about here in a minute, for a very long time. And, it just got, the word, or maybe the phrase, became popular when platforms started to come up and we started to associate like this stuff with platforms, and maybe platforms could do this stuff for us, et cetera. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that, what this history is like. So let's start there. Let's jump into that. So we've got a little bit of data. So Lauren, why don't you take us through some of that history that you found, and we'll comment on it.
Yeah. So, truth be told, Jason, what started to happen about 15 years ago is ABM became everything. Like it was like the favorite flavor. And I just got really curious about it. And I thought, everyone's talking about ABM, but like, surely this was not, born yesterday. This is like a really smart route for essentially like giving a warm hug to your most important customers and prospects. And so, I started to dig back. And if you dig back over a century ago and look at things like the Perpetual Principal, which are essentially the 80-20 rule, you start to realize that that rule applies to good marketing, right? You focus, 80% of your time and energy on a smaller group of people, but that are going to bring the majority of revenue to the organization. And so, with that Pareto principle, or that 80-20 rule, even in like the early days, if you go back and look at IBM, for instance, their sales organization, like back in the 1960s, was practicing that kind of marketing. And then I know these are just, I got really interested in it because it just is, account-based marketing is such a logical way to go to market. In my mind, the term account-based is almost interchangeable with just great marketing. 25 years ago, a business author named Richard Koch first identified this 80-20 rule as an incredibly effective approach for sales organizations. So he kind of codified the approach, back in the 90s. And then just a handful of years after that, the ITSMA, the IT Services Marketing Association, and I was involved. This is kind of back in the, probably early 2000s. And they said, hey, this ABM thing, it's a thing. And, they defined it as a proven approach to building relationships with your most valued customers and prospects with highly targeted marketing interactions that demonstrate your in-depth understanding of their business and business challenges. And I'm telling you, to this day, I love that definition, because that's really what it's about. And, when you think about it from a mathematical perspective, right? I mean, we know that it's more cost effective to mature relationships with your current customers than to just be knocking on new doors all day. But that said, account-based marketing is a super effective approach, whether you're out looking to land net new customers, whether you're looking to accelerate opportunities that are in pipeline, and or if you're looking to grow the footprint with current customers. So, I really used an account-based approach in all of those use cases, and they are all, really relevant and timely and effective, and just, again, super smart marketing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think when I think of the 80-20 rule, it does make a lot of sense. I never really thought of those together, because it's the 80-20 rule is basically, if you apply that to marketing, it's almost like most of us are doing the 100-100 rule, I think, which is do everything to everybody, right? Yeah. And so that's the traditional spray and pray, or whatever you want to call it. And so if you think about, from that perspective, it does make a lot of sense, because it is, we're trying to take our limited marketing assets that we have, or resources, budget, et cetera, and we're trying to apply that in the best way possible to specific people or companies that have a reason to hear from us, instead of just trying to blanket everything. And it also gets into, and this is a common problem I see in just traditional ABM programs, your kind of reach and frequency metrics as well, right? And so the company I was at not that long ago, I don't like to say their name when I'm about to say something not great, but I used to say to people, you guys, our target account list is so big, we're only serving half of an ad to each person, because it's so wide and our resources are only this deep. It's well, what can you do with that? You can go like this really broadly, versus you can take it in and make it more narrow, but go really deep and get people. And, as our products and services that we're selling and marketing have become more complicated, that's become a more important thing, is you got to take people through that deep journey. And I'm getting off of the history, but I'll kind of come back to the history, but to get to that. And so I like that 80-20 rule to help explain that. And what's interesting is it makes sense that some of these big companies would pick this up. But what's ITSMA again? It's the IT Sales and Marketing.
IT Services Marketing Association. So, their member base, and, I think they're still around. Their member base, though, was
I think they are,
large, the IBMs and the Hewlett Packards and the Microsofts, their services organizations and these big companies. So, their customer base were large technology companies doing very kind of complex enterprise sales. And in those complex enterprise sales, there was, a lot of kind of fundamental beliefs that still are as pertinent, if not more so. There are a lot of parties involved in the decision making. So how do you really look at an account based on all of the decision makers and influencers that are involved? And how do you really make sure that you're considering how those people interconnect and what the dependencies are, and what each of those parties needs in order to move forward in the buying cycle? You also have very long sales cycles. And so, that random acts of marketing, let's just throw a bunch of stuff out there and see what sticks, that doesn't work. That's not going to be effective. And so I think that the ITSMA in so many ways was a great, they're really a thought leadership research firm. And it was a concept that not only did they look at account-based marketing kind of in its purest form, and its purest form meaning like, what is the buyer journey and what are all the tools and, all the content pieces that we need in order to, move somebody through a buyer journey. Not only were they looking at all of those pieces, but at a certain point, I'll say, I don't know, 5 to 8 years ago, they started to say, well, how do we do this at scale? And I'm still convinced. There was a gal at Xerox that I worked with around that time frame, and her and I chat in a bar one night in Boston during an SMA conference. And I remember having this conversation with her saying, hey, what does ABM at scale look like? And so we started to throw around just this silly late night Boston bar idea called ABM Light. And the notion of ABM Light, I think, is actually something that's really in practice today, which is how do you use technology in order to give you scale? It might be, as you were saying, in your past life, you had so many accounts that you could only go that deep. But that's where I really see that like technology is an awesome enabler, because if you can use an overlay of, appended information about how other people have responded, or appended information about their demographic information or their behavioral data, you can start to really create a personalized experience for somebody based on all of those different attributes. And in my mind, that really is kind of ABM at scale, or as the Boston Bar Night, we called it ABM Light. And I did actually notice that on the ITMSA website they use that term.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if they came up with it on their own or somehow if it fed back, because the work that we did with Xerox, again, this is like in the early 2000s. I mean, it was winning all sorts of awards because it actually, like, we're doing these ABM Light programs, and this is, back that we worked together, Jason, we were doing these ABM programs that were putting hundreds of millions of dollars in the pipeline. Like, it was not, oh, it's a nice thing to do. Like, it was actually driving both net new business, or in their use case, it was also about really growing share of wallet with their current customers.
So what's interesting to me is, so then why do we think that a lot of people think that ABM is newer? You know what I mean? So like it feels like it's been a bandwagon term for like the last I'll call it 5 years, maybe. And because I know even at Babcock and Jenkins, I was talking to Matt, what's interesting to me, real quick side, is that time at Babcock and Jenkins, I have like kept some of the best colleagues, network folks, friends from that, like you, Matt Cannell, I've got Carmen, Carmen, we're working together again. It was an amazing experience.
We're trailblazing. We were trailblazing these concepts, and we were fiddling around. But I mean, listen, to go back to your question, back in those days, Jason, and it's why we needed guys like you. We needed to like hack technology, or like, jerry-rig technology to help us deliver some of these kind of great experiences at scale. And I think, the momentum that we're feeling in the market today is that giving personalized experiences over a long period of time, or over the entire sales cycle, from, first opportunity of meeting to you've onboarded them and now you're giving them, a great kind of customer experience. We used to have to jerry-rig technologies to do that. But fast forward, I mean, there are some amazing technologies that have emerged over the last, 5-7 years that really are great enablers and orchestrators of account-based marketing. And with any great SaaS company, they have made a lot of conversation about it. So, we're all hearing about it now because it works, and they're really facilitating it, which is awesome. But I mean, you've heard me say a million times before, technology is not a strategy. It is not a strategy, but it's an amazing enabler if you have a great strategy in place.
Yeah, and that's what I think I see a lot of people, and I think you're right in that we started to use and hear the term ABM more because we called it a TAP program, right? Back at B&J, it was a targeted account program, right? Very simple, very literal. And so I think we started hearing it because I don't know, maybe it was ITSMA that coined that term, but then technology started to get onto that and then start calling themselves an ABM platform.
Right.
Because I think this happens a lot because that was the new term from like what we need to do. And so, I do 30% of that. So I'm going to call myself an ABM platform. And then I think what happened is, because now people associate ABM campaigns with just engagement, right? So like, at least in my world where I came from, it was like, if you talk about ABM campaigns, you're talking about engaging accounts with the assumption that that's going to turn to revenue. But I think we've defined it that way, and people stop when it become a customer. They don't think about, a lot of people don't think about ABM that goes past when they become a customer all the way to the renewal and upsell and everything else. But I think maybe we let the platforms define or try to define what ABM is based on what they were good at. And then I think it became more popular because there was all this advertising going on around it, and these platforms saying, you need to be doing ABM if you're not. And people were probably already doing it in some way, right? Because businesses haven't been selling to people, you know what I mean? Like only people for so long. Like there's been 10, 20 years where they've been like, hey, no, we're selling to an account. We're trying to figure this out. But like you said, cobbling the technologies together to do it. And so then you come along, you get these other technologies that maybe take 3 of those things and put it together. And now you think that's what ABM is, and it's not. And so I kind of think that's what happened. And so we got a little bit further away from it as a process, like you were saying. Yeah. And we started to talk about it more as just the technology. So, do you have an ABM technology, or do you have an ABM platform, or what do you use for ABM? Well, 18 things, you know what I mean? Right. It's not one thing. It's all this stuff.
You're spot on. I mean, listen, again, if you, not to cut you off, but it's like, I love to go back to this like classic definition. It's a proven approach to build relationships with your most valued customers and prospects, with highly targeted interactions that demonstrate your in-depth understanding of their business and their business challenges. And you could almost just, swipe in like, what is good marketing? And it would be defined in the same way. So, I think that whether you're using, one ABM platform, or somehow you have found good reason to use, a dozen, I think it goes back to, is your strategy on solving their business challenges, both at individual levels and at an account level, right?
Yeah.
And, one thing I know you and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about today, but like there is more. It's not just about solving those business challenges like in a moment, right? Like via a webinar, but it's really understanding where they're at and really having thought through that conversation you'd like to have with them. And as opposed to kind of random acts of marketing that you sprinkle upon them, it's really meeting them where they are at in that buyer journey and taking them through an always on or a perpetual conversation that, again, whether they're a customer and we're looking to create success or upsell, cross-sell, or whether they're somebody who has a new problem and have never had a solution to solve that, and you're able to address that solution. So whether it's new logo or somewhere in the pipeline, or 10 years down a relationship, those are all opportunities to really engage somebody in an always on perpetual relationship.
Yeah. And I like this. So so we talk about the important aspects of the strategy. So let's talk about that a little bit. So like, let's say, okay, so ABM is not a technology, or there are technologies, but like you said, technology is not a strategy. And so what do we think are like some of the more critical aspects of a good ABM strategy?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of get back to the basics, Jason, because the way I think about a good ABM strategy is the way I think about a good go-to-market strategy for really any B2B organization that's got some sort of a considered purchase, right? So, step one, ICP, like who is your target? And whether that's, 500 individuals at 5 organizations, or whether it's 5 individuals at 500 organizations or 5,000, you have to get really crisp and crystal clear on who your ICP is and what are the segments that make up that ICP. So ICP being your ideal customer profile, is it a handful of different kind of roles or responsibilities that people have? In our definition, ICP is not necessarily just, a company size and a job role. It's actually more of a mindset and an attitude.
Yep. I like that.
So that's
I think of it
really
that way too, because like what I found, if you stop your ICP with just those basic filters that everybody has access to, my thought is that's not a defined enough target account list to go after, because you're basically just using the fact that who they sell to, basically, are they B2B, B2C? What industry are they in?
Right.
What's their size? You know what I mean? Where are their headquarters located? Those are the basic criteria that most people are using to try to first segment. But I'm always been a proponent of, you've got to have additional intelligence in the segmentation so that you can personalize the message. So for example, if you just had those few that I said, the best message you could say is, hello, VP of marketing from, Annuitas. How's life in Portland, Oregon? You know what I mean? You're just like, but if you do a little bit more digging and you have other data points that you can use to inform why you're going after them. And so like one of my examples that I use is, we sell to people who are doing B2B advertising, right? Primarily on Facebook and LinkedIn. Well, what did I do? I just started with that first list, industry, company size, et cetera, but it was like, 12,000 accounts. Well, I'm not going to market. I might do some display to 12,000, but I'm not going to do paid social to 12,000 accounts because I'm not going to get anywhere with them. And so I figured out a way to go out, count the number of paid ads they have on those platforms. And so that gave me more intelligence that I could use. And like, if they do way heavier on LinkedIn than Facebook, then I have a very direct message I can send them. Guess what?
Love that.
But I know why you don't do Facebook, because Facebook is not very targetable for B2B. What if I could unlock that for you and you get Facebook pricing, but for blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm not trying to sell it, but so
it's super
that's
smart.
what I say. Like, people need to have something else. And that I think leads to the personalization, because you can't personalize something if you don't have that intelligence. And that's another piece that's come in not lately, technology that helps us scale that part of it. Because before, that was like a manual lookup probably, or trying to figure something out. Now you got these providers of intent data you can use. Most intent data I don't love, but there's some decent intent data. You can do hacky things like I did, go count stuff, create scripts. There's other things you can do. There's like lists of companies that recently got funding, or, there's all these different things you can start to pull together to create that list, and then have something to say to them that's going to be a little bit more personalized than just like, hey, you work in this industry and so do all of our other customers, so come use us.
Yeah. And I think, Jason, there are kind of those three elements of your ICP, which is, those things that you can kind of like very specifically outline, like an industry or maybe a revenue band or a role. There's the things that you're talking about, which is, kind of doing a deeper pass on maybe behaviors or habits that have been documented kind of previously that you can apply. And then I think the third layer is that, a really good account-based marketing program needs to be able to kind of pivot and evolve based on both how somebody interacts with your content and or your website, and also pivot and evolve based on, like best practices like progressive profiling. Perhaps you are gathering a little bit more intel on somebody as they navigate through your content, but in a way that's not like, some big roadblock. It's, it's a little bit more gradual. And so there's more willing to offer up insights.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a good, so we've talked about like your traditional, I'll say traditional, because the places I've worked, I think we've done it more traditionally. So this is my experience. This is how a normal ABM campaign goes. And then we're going to bridge over and we're going to talk about how it should maybe go. So and these are at big companies I've worked at. So this is like 100 people getting together, like trying to figure this out in marketing alone. And okay, we start with, okay, great. We're going to identify that target account market. How are we going to do that? Okay, that took 3 months. You know what I mean? It's like going back and forth with sales. We're trying to pull in intelligence. Sales wants to hand pick stuff. It's like, okay, let's figure this out. So that's already the first hard part. Then you realize you just created the audience is probably way too big to what you can do, but you just leave it in there anyway. Like, okay, we're going to agree on this larger audience because no one can agree on a smaller audience because everyone thinks it's a volume game, which it really shouldn't be. So now we got this big audience, and now we've got to get this campaign exactly right, you know, because we're going to like have all these different legs of the campaign and through all these channels and different interactions. So we're going to just get heads down, and we're going to spend 2 more months on the creative and on the messaging, and we're going to get this campaign just dialed in. And then we launch it. So great, it's going out there, we're spending money. That team has now moved on to the next campaign. They're working on that. 0 people are on the previous campaign looking at it or optimizing it, because the goal for that team was to get the campaign out the door. They met their goal.
Stop the
I know. Yep. And this is literally my experience. And so, and then we're all on to the next one. We don't know how this one worked. Not only are we not optimizing this one, but we're not even taking the learnings and putting it into the next one. So like the next one is just going to be just as bad as the previous one. No learnings. And now we're also doing 8 campaigns a year. You know what I mean? And it's like, and we're shifting up the messaging. And so that's been my experience of doing ABM campaigns in a big company. And so let's talk about the right way to do it. So this is where obviously Lauren and I knew each other from B&J, but when I first got introduced to Annuitas, was this notion of perpetual demand generation. And just even the name of it like intrigued me. So I was like, that sounds, even without any definition, like something I would be interested in learning more about, especially from an ops perspective. And so that's when we really started talking. I think it was at Tableau or maybe even Getty Images, when you went to Annuitas, and I started learning more about your guys' process around this. So talk a little bit about that process. So how does Annuitas, and again, we're not selling Annuitas, but this is a strategic play that I think is, I think everybody should be doing. So, so talk a little bit about that process and how it's different than what I just described.
You know what I wrote on my piece of paper as you were talking is death of the campaign. It's an 82% failure rate. I mean, what you're talking about, Jason, is pretty pervasive across organizations where, there's a go-to-market that's centered around a theme or a topic that is important to the target audience. And at its first pass, that's actually like fantastic, right? That's what you think you should do. And I think companies are getting a lot better in creating better content, right? Like you're describing, it was thoughtful, it was targeted. But the problem is it might be the right content, but it's not necessarily right time or right place in terms of how it's delivered. Mm-hmm. And so this statistic that, 82% of the time you'll either be wrong time or wrong place. And so you're failing more than you're succeeding with that type of a campaign motion. And so this notion of being perpetual or always on means that you are always right time, right place, because you are essentially having somebody enter an always on or perpetual conversation between your brand and themselves, or your brand and their business or their business needs. And so they can be very self-guided. And again, with technology as enabler and with an idea of the conversation that will be right for that person, you can really take them from where they started to their end point, whether that end point is that they complete a purchase, or they complete and then implement a purchase, or complete and implement and then go on to be your best customer. And so companies that really shift to this always on perspective are actually getting between 4 and 10x better throughput in their funnel, meaning, Serious Decisions will indicate that about 0.3% of B2B buyers make it from the top to closed won in a funnel, 0.3. We see when people shift to a perpetual or always on approach, they're getting upwards of about 1.7% conversion from top of funnel to closed won, and as high as 3.5%. So that's like, 4 or 5 to 10x more kind of completion through the funnel. And so when you think about it, it's about delivering right time, right place, and right message. And it works.
What do you think it is so obviously perpetual demand generation is going to be about figuring out what works, right? Because if it's going to be perpetual, then at least in my mind, it's like, well, then that means we're spending time to figure out what it is going to be perpetual. And then we're still, we're going to still flex that over time as things change. But what do you think in the perpetual demand gen process, out of all the differences, what do you think what has the biggest impact, you know what I mean, on that rate? So is it the personalization piece? Is it the constant optimization? Is it the, what is it? Is it the focus on fewer things for the team? Like what is it in there that you think makes it that dramatic of a change?
Well, you just named three really good things, right? You're timely and relevant. You have a team who's not scattered doing a lot of random acts, but I really think that the measurement and optimization, and I know I'm speaking to, a guy who's a data scientist at heart, like I'm singing your song, Jason, but it is really true, is that, in the early days, and you and I could, call on examples where, we'd look at things like engagement rates and click-through rates and all of these vanity metrics. But what we really didn't understand is who was converting to a closed one, right? Like who was getting her done and making their way through the funnel. And so when you're sitting in a mode where you're really having a full funnel view and looking at that critical path of how somebody moved from top to bottom, you can really start to dial in for those segments and for those personas, what content is helping move people through. We look at things like elasticity of content, what channels are moving people through, and you can really start to spend your time optimizing what's working, throwing out the stuff that's not working, versus, as you were talking about, when you're doing campaigns, it's a constant like rinse, repeat, build a new thing, move on, and you're never making that thing that you spent so much time on more better. It's all about more better.
Yeah. I always got so upset about that. I would get probably like irrationally upset just knowing that you guys, we spent so much time on this and then we're just leaving it out there, and it's like, there's no way we can get it right the first time. There's no way. Like we are not, us 7 people or 10 or whatever are not representative enough of everybody we're trying to go after for us to just know this is going to work.
Right.
And then, and it's just so crazy to me. And so, but I think the important part here is that we're not talking about needing a new platform, right? We're not talking about needing new technology. You can do this. This is much, much more of a process and a mindset change than it is like, oh, I'll just throw this new technology at it. And I love those because I hate new things that require new technology. Because then it's just like, well, unless it's like a technology that just takes something that you do on your own and just helps you scale the shit out of it. But that's why I like this. And I like talking about it because you can do this on your own. You know what I mean? It's like, it's definitely helpful. It's hard to do. I will say that, especially at a larger organization, this is a mindset shift. It's a shift where you're telling, and trust me, I've tried to sell this in with Lauren to my own marketing leadership. And you're basically coming in and saying, yep, we're going to do less. We're going to do less stuff. We're going to go from 17 campaigns a year to 4. It's going to take a little bit of time, to warm it up. We're going to optimize. We're going to put more of our resources on that. And I think they get scared, because it's like, I can't predict what I can do with that, but I can definitely use my historical data to predict. The prediction's going to be shit, but I can at least be confident in that shit prediction. And I hate that because then it's like, yes, let's just keep basing everything on the historical data and then let's not go anywhere. Right. And so I love this because it's like, yes, you're not saying don't do ABM. You're saying you've been doing it, but wrong, which I think a lot of people realize now. And you're just saying like, listen, you got to get more scientific about this. You got to stop doing all the things you're doing because the things are not what is converting. It's like you got to figure out what are the things. I think you're also saying you got to test a lot of things too, because you don't know early on what is going to work or if something over here that's fairly far afield from what you've been doing may work even better. Right. So like a lot of testing to get through things. And so that's why I like that's why I like that process. That's why I think that's the way it should be done, and so how do we get everybody to do this then, to do it this way? Because like, I don't know if there'd be anybody that would argue with us about this. You know what I mean? Like they would say like, nah, you guys are bullshit. Like that's not the way to do it. Don't look at your data. Don't optimize. So if it's pretty much a head nod, well, let me just ask you this. What are the objections you get when you're selling this?
I mean, honestly, Jason, I feel like you and I have rehearsed this, even though we never have. It's a lot of the change management that's the biggest resistance, right? Like so many of the companies I talk to, it's not a technology problem. Either they have a great stack, or they, have a motivation to purchase some technology. They obviously all want to be successful as a business, so there's a reason to drive growth. The biggest resistance I get is, well, I don't know if my sales organization will buy into this. They kind of want it this other way, or I'm not sure if I can get buy-in from my content team. They really do things this way, and so it really is a lot of the resistance to change, because it's really kind of flipping marketing on its head and saying, listen, we're going to establish what that buyer journey is that we want to take somebody down, and we're going to retool our people, our processes, our content, and our technology to be buyer centric. And that's really what great account-based marketing should be. It's what an always on conversation should be. And the good news is that when you do it right, you create quite a bit of lift in your pipeline. So it's impactful.
Yeah.
And listen, happy to share, different types of benchmarks with people if they're interested, but it gives you a new set of benchmarks, but they are far more predictable and sustainable when you set up your demand engine to be, wrapped around the buyer journey.
Yeah. So because of that, you probably need to really convince the CMO or the head of marketing, right? Because like if it's going to be a whole change, if it's really about change management, that has to come from the top, right?
It's team sport. I mean, it's not even the CMO alone. They can be the catalyst for change, but the organizations where we've had the most success, and again, it's variable based on the size of business, but with growth stage companies, unless the CEO is on board, it's got to be somebody who's really driving change and wants to impact their growth in a way that's sustainable and predictable. So, but it's team sport. It can come from the top down, from the CEO. Listen, at some of the big organizations we work with, the board has dictated, we need a digital transformation to support these growth objectives. And so you then have, teams that are really collaborating to say, here's a solution for doing that. But it definitely is a corporate growth initiative versus, a marketing campaign, if you will.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's been another great conversation. Anything to leave the listeners, viewers with on our way out?
I mean, understand your target and understand that account-based marketing isn't about a platform or tool, even though they're awesome and they can be great enablers. It's really about orchestrating conversations around buyer journey. So I'd leave it there. And, Jason, I'll do this anytime. I love having an excuse to chit chat with you. So thank you for having me.
Nice. Well, thanks. It's always great talking to you, and thanks for coming on. And so everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.